You told yourself you would stop. You mean it. You weren't lying, and then the bag was empty, the cart was full, the hour was gone, and you had watched nothing you actually wanted to watch. And the thing that came after wasn't just frustration, it was that specific kind of shame that comes from doing something you didn't want to do. Again, despite knowing better. And you thought, what's wrong with me? Why can't I just stop? I have tried to stop. Why does this keep happening? I want to tell you something today that I think is going to change the frame on this entirely. The reason you can't stop has almost nothing to do with willpower and almost everything to do with your brain's baseline dopamine level. I'm Ibrahim, nurse practitioner, registered psychotherapist, Ottawa and Toronto, and I want to talk to you about something that sits right at the intersection of ADHD and shame, which is the pattern of seeking, the eating that goes past full, the buying that goes past need, the scrolling that goes past tired, the conflict you picked because something needed to happen, the risk you took because flat felt unbearable. These aren't failures of character, these are dopamine deficient brain doing exactly what dopamine deficient brains do, finding the fastest available source of the thing they're chronically short on. And once you understand that, the whole pattern looks different. The ADHD brain has a baseline dopamine regulation problem. Not sometimes, baseline. The resting level of dopamine availability in the ADHD brain is lower than average, which means the brain is in a chronic low-grade way, always looking for more. And the brain doesn't discriminate between sources. It doesn't say, this is healthy dopamine hit, and this isn't. It says, this one is fast, and this one is available right now. Food, especially high sugar, high fat food, produces a rapid dopamine response. Buying something produces a spike at the moment of decision, not even at receipt. Scrolling produces micro hits of novelty every few seconds, engineered deliberately by people who understand exactly how dopamine works and build the product around exploiting it. Your brain didn't choose these things because you are weak. It chose them because they work fast, reliably every time. Here is what makes this harder. Willpower is a prefrontal cortex function. The prefrontal cortex is exactly the part of the brain that is most affected by ADHD. So, the standard advice, just use more willpower, just resist more, just be more disciplined, is asking the broken part to fix itself. It's like telling someone with a broken leg just to walk it off, just like run. The instruction is not wrong in theory. The explanation is completely disconnected from the actual problem. This is why every diet you have tried worked until it didn't. Why every spending ban lasted 3 weeks. Why you have deleted the app and re-downloaded it more times than you can count. Not because you lack commitment, because commitment lives in the same part of the brain that's already struggling. Now, I want to talk about when those behaviors spike, because the pattern is consistent and it's clinically telling. They go up when life is low stimulus, when you're bored, understimulated, in a routine that the brain finds unbearable. They go up when you are stressed, because stress depletes dopamine further and the brain escalates its search. They go up at the end of the day when executive function is depleted and the inhibition systems that were barely working are now offline completely. They go up when you are emotionally activated. Rejection, criticism, conflict, because the brain is looking for something to regulate emotional spike with. Understanding when they spike tells you something about what the brain is actually asking for. And that's more useful than shame. The shame spiral is its own problem, and I want to name it clearly. Shame is a dopamine suppressor, which means the worse you feel about the behavior, the lower your dopamine goes, which increases the craving, which increases the likelihood of the behavior, which increases the shame. This is not a metaphor, this is a neurological loop. The approach of be harder on yourself about this is not just unhelpful, it's actively making the pattern worse. Every time someone has told you that you just need more willpower, more discipline, more self control, they have unknowingly given you advice that deepens the loop instead of breaking it. The way out is not through shame. It's through understanding the mechanism and building differently around it. Let me tell you what I'm listening for when this comes up in an assessment. I'm not flagging eating, spending, and scrolling as character problems to address. I am treating them as information. They are telling me the brain is chronically understimulated and reaching for regulation. They are telling me something about baseline dopamine, about impulsivity, about emotional dysregulation, about how much of the day the person is spending in a state of low grade distress that these behaviors are temporarily relieving. And they are telling me that any treatment plan that doesn't address the underlying dysregulation is going to produce the same result as the willpower approach. Temporary involvement followed, temporary improvement followed by the pattern returning because the source hasn't been touched. As a nurse practitioner, what I can do is look at the whole picture. I can assess whether what I'm seeing is ADHD driven dopamine seeking or whatever, or whether there is a compulsive component that needs a different approach, or whether mood is the primary driver and these are mood driven behaviors, or some combination. These distinctions matter for treatment. ADHD medication, when appropriate, raises baseline dopamine, which reduces the intensity of seeking. Not completely, not magically, but enough that the behavior becomes a choice rather than compulsion. Enough that the just stop that was impossible before becomes possible. Because the underlying deficit that was driving it has been addressed rather than just suppressed. I want to reframe something before we close. You were solving a real problem. The problem was real. Your brain was asking for something it genuinely needed. The solution was imperfect. The tools you reached for had costs that the dopamine hit didn't offset. But you weren't being irrational, you weren't being weak. You were doing what every human nervous system does when it's running short on something essential. You were finding it wherever you could. The goal isn't to take away the solution without understanding the problem. The goal is to understand the problem clearly enough that better solutions become available. That's what assessment does. That's what treatment does. It doesn't take something away from you, it gives you more options than you had before. The eating, the spending, the scrolling, these are not who you are. They are what your brain has been doing to survive an environment it wasn't built for, without the support it needed, without anyone explaining what was actually happening. You were handed a problem and no tools and told to use willpower. Of course, it didn't work. Willpower was never the right tool. The right tools exist. They are clinical, they are specific, and they work with how your brain actually runs instead of against it. If this clicked into something, if you have spent years in the shame loop around behaviors you couldn't explain and couldn't stop, come to adultadhd.crocuscare.ca. Let's figure out what's actually driving this. Not the behavior, the mechanism underneath it. That's where the real answer is.